MAGA judicial circles is sort of, to paraphrase Trump, putting on a pause to figure out what the hell is going on.
Good evening. Welcome to RealClearPolitics on SiriusXM. It is Wednesday, May 7th. I'm Tom Bevan, co-founder and president of RCP, joined tonight by Emily Jashinsky. She's the Washington correspondent for UnHerd, and our very own Phil Wegmann. He's our White House correspondent for RealClearPolitics. Well, guys, it is Real ID Day, May 7th. We talked about this on the show yesterday. I am still without my Real ID, and I'm traveling on Saturday, so hopefully it's not going to be too much of a mess. But Phil, the other big news is that Joe Biden gave his first interview with the BBC, sat down there and made some headlines. He said that he thought that Trump was appeasing Russia with the talks with Ukraine. And I think the biggest newsmaker of the day, Phil, was he was asked and talked about why he ended up getting out of the race and what a tough decision it was. And effectively what he said was that he was too successful, that he had originally planned on being a transitional figure, but they got so much done and he was so successful that it was just too hard to step away. What did you see this interview and what was your reaction to it?
The former president is tanned, rested, ready, on the precipice of a comeback here. Look, I think that the big news coming out of this interview was not what Biden said. We could telegraph for the most part what he was probably going to say before that reporter sat down with him. Instead, I think that the significance is that Biden, shortly after Trump's first 100 days, is getting back out there. He's sitting down with an outlet because what we've been talking about in the wake of his presidency is all of the true accounts from people very close to him about what it was actually like on the inside. And I think that this is Biden's attempt to retake the narrative, to try and remind everyone that he's still there. And as far as this boast that he was running for a second term because he had been so successful, well, that's clearly wishful thinking. We all looked at the poll numbers that cratered for the former president the moment that he left Afghanistan, the moment that he wasn't able to get inflation under control. So it's a interesting swan song, but I don't think we learned too much.
Emily, what do you think? And is this the beginning of the Biden comeback? Do you expect him to be doing more interviews and making more news along the way?
So I had a really cynical thought about this just before we started recording, which is that I wonder if it becomes a kind of reverse Reagan situation where a lot of times people look back at the Reagan administration and seeing him after his presidency, they will associate those caricature images of Reagan with the Reagan that was in the White House, the sort of enfeebled and senile Reagan of his post-presidential years gets conflated with the Reagan of his presidential years. And I wonder now if this is the start of memory holing how bad Joe Biden was. And again, this is really cynical because to me, he sounded exactly like he did when he was the commander-in-chief and the leader of the free world. But I wonder, again, I know this makes me seem like a total doomer who has no hope in civilization remaining, but I do genuinely wonder if this is an exit ramp for the media to be able to memory hole the bad coverage and say, what you see of Joe Biden, that is Joe Biden after his presidency. He was weak, he was older, he was out of office. Who knows, but I could see that happening.
Bill, when I watch these interviews, I am always intrigued by the question of not just why did they give the interview, but why did they give the interview to the people that they did? Why did he go to the BBC here? Why did he not sit down with any of his allies and friendlies on ABC News or CBS? This was obviously a huge get. I'm sure they would have taken him. Any one of them would. But so why did he choose to go sit down with a reporter that I have never heard of? And I don't know that anyone in America has ever heard of. No offense to the guy, but whatever. With the BBC.
My cynical speculation is that the Biden camp thought that they could spin this person. And certainly it wasn't the most aggressive interview that we've seen. I think that the likely reason that Biden didn't sit down with someone from any of the big networks here in the United States is because they also watched that debate in Atlanta. And it doesn't pass the smell test anymore to make these excuses that what we saw of the president was a cheap fake, that he is all there and is running circles around his staff. I think that even ABC News, CBS, NBC, some of these outlets that were more charitable in their characterization of his decline, at this point, even they wouldn't be willing to sit down and do a softball interview like this. The blood has been in the water for a long time. And even though he's out of the public eye, I think any journalist would realize that the cost of taking a swing at Biden, of really pushing him on what was happening behind the scenes, especially as we do now know more, I think that they wouldn't have been able to say no to that temptation.
I mean, Emily, that sounds kind of right to me.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, because, there have been now suddenly, we've got all these books and we've got all this reporting and we've got the quotes from Ron Clay and all this stuff. So if he were to sit down with, anyone from ABC, CBS, NBC, even maybe MSNBC, maybe not, but, any journalist who wasn't just a total hack shill would have had to have asked him about his mental capacity, and yet we didn't really get any of that.
Right, because they are based on an incentive structure that is informed by American audiences. And almost all Americans at this point agree that Joe Biden had serious problems that the media covered very poorly. So I guess in a sense, that means the media is probably going to be less willing to memory hold. There's an argument on either side of this. They're going to be less willing to memory hold it because now that he's out of office and out of power, this is not somebody who, like between his vice presidency and his presidency, they needed to cozy up to for the sake of influence. He does not have that. He is, to be frank, kind of a damaged brand in Washington and in the Beltway. So they don't really have any incentives to suck up to Joe Biden anymore. If anything, they have incentives not to, in order to look like they are being tough, like they are making up for lost time. It allows them to kind of, show that they're willing to be tough on Joe Biden, even if it wasn't during the presidency. It still lets them say that. So I think that's probably absolutely correct. That Philip's point is this is somebody outside of the United States, BBC, and it just wasn't going to be what it would have been, even with somebody like Rachel Maddow.
Yeah. Phil, I don't want to spend too much more time on Joe Biden, but there was an interesting poll that came out this morning from Berkeley, the government studies program there at Berkeley, and had a bunch of numbers in it. It had some stuff on Trump saying his approval ratings were historically low. Not a shocker there. Had some data on Gavin Newsom. Voters in California think he's spending too much time running for president, not enough time running for, managing the states, governing the state.
Did they poll Carl Cannon?
We have to drink when we're mentioning Gavin Newsom without Carl here. But the other piece that was in this is they asked registered voters in California the question, based on what Joe Biden did in his presidency, how would you rate him? How do you think history is going to rate him versus past presidents? And that the options were, he's one of the best ever. He's above average. He's merely average. He's below average, or one of the worst ever. 24% of California registered voters, so 1 in 4, said that Biden would end up being ranked as one of the worst presidents ever. And even 55%, so 42% of Democrats in California said he was, at best, he was going to be ranked average. Another 13%, so 55% of voters, Democrats in California, said that he was going to be, below average. That to me, remember, I can't ever get it out of my head, Nancy Pelosi saying, we're going to put him on Mount Rushmore. And I mean, they were just like, he's so good. He's the best. We've never had a president this good before. I mean, that was the spin during the campaign when he was, not only when he was running for re-election, but after he left. That clearly did not resonate or wear well, however you want to put it, with voters across the country. And again, this is in California, so you can imagine what the numbers would look like if you were talking about a state like Alabama or Mississippi.
Yeah, I think what this reflects is the fact that the Biden brand is greatly diminished, as Emily noted, and that's not just a ego thing. It has actual practical implications. What has President Obama done since out of office? He raised a bunch of money. He served as a talent scout for the Democratic Party, trying to identify up and comers who can continue his project and his mission. But who right now wants to have a meeting with former President Biden if you are a Democratic candidate? And who wants that meeting to leak to the press? Because certainly I think that a lot of Democrats would acknowledge that Biden had a tough situation. COVID, the invasion of Ukraine, later, his decision to pull out of Afghanistan, which both Republicans and Democrats had agreed was the right decision. They don't like the way that it happened, but it certainly was a challenging presidency. There were difficult things for him to do, but did he meet the moment? I don't think that there are a lot of Democrats who would say that he did, and that's reflected in the polling. And so, in his final moments, as he writes his final chapter, I think that the circle surrounding Joe Biden is going to shrink more and more. There's not going to be a lot of people looking to him for advice as an elder statesman.
Emily, you get the last word in this segment. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think this undercuts the argument I was originally making that maybe we see, because the media's coverage was so egregious of Biden's health, or the lack of the media's coverage was so egregious, that they might, try to gloss over it. But I think what we're seeing more and more is the media kind of reckoning with exactly how bad that was. Alex Thompson talking at the White House Correspondent Center about how they quote unquote missed it, which I would quibble with the wording there very significantly. But I think Philip's right. Fundamentally, the reason, the biggest bias in Washington isn't just partisanship, or in Washington journalism isn't necessarily partisanship so much as it is influence peddling. And journalists want to be around the influential people, and they want to have good relationships with them. And Biden is not influential anymore, so he can say goodbye, I think, to the warmth that he used to receive in Beltway circles.
All right, we will leave it there for this segment. You're listening to Real Clear Politics on SiriusXM. I'm Tom Bevan, speaking with Emily Jashinsky and Phil Wegmann. We're going to take a quick break, and we'll be back with more after this. Welcome back to Real Clear Politics on SiriusXM. I'm Tom Bevan, co-founder and president of RCP, speaking with Phil Wegmann and Emily Jashinsky today. Guys, we just gave Biden the business in the first segment, so let's get into Trump a little bit. Phil, Trump has made a little bit of news here, mostly on Truth Social, but he's nominated, I think, 4 or 5 people for federal judgeships. It marks sort of the first effort that he's made on the judiciary. Remember, he talked a lot about this in his first term, how many made over, I think, 100 judicial appointments. That was like Mitch McConnell's selling card, that he was able to get all those nominations through. So why now? Why did he wait this long? What's going on, and what can we expect moving forward?
I don't have a good sense of the reason for the delay. I know it was jarring. When I interviewed Donald Trump walking into the Oval Office, one of the first things I saw was him literally sitting at his desk, behind the Resolute desk there, giving his signature to all sorts of judicial nominees. This is something that he was incredibly proud of. And if you look at the first 100 days of his first term, he had made, obviously, the Gorsuch nomination to the Supreme Court, but I think 20 or 30 other lower court nominations. He was ready to roll. They wanted to remake the federal judiciary, if not in Trump's image, but in the image of the Federalist Society. This time around, I think that one thing that could tell some of the story for the delay is that he's not leaning on the Federalist Society, and he's not leaning on the Heritage Foundation in the way that he had previously, because he's frustrated by some of the Trump judges who have ruled against his administration. So this time around, I think that they are less focused on quote unquote right conservative judicial orthodoxy. And they're looking for people who are more political, who are perhaps more partisan. And now he's firing up the nomination machine after 100 days. My expectation is that he's going to be leaning on the advice of folks like Mike Davis on the outside, of folks like Stephen Miller on the inside. And this time around, they really do want judges who aren't just the right person according to the conservative judicial community. They want Trump justices.
Emily, what do you think? I mean, I don't know that anyone expected it to happen like this sort of flurry of Truth Social posts happening late at night. That seemed kind of unexpected to me. But up until that point, he had only, I think, made one nomination in his first, 100+ days, which was a little bit shocking.
Yeah, I agree with Philip. I think it stems from this simmering schism under the surface. It pops up every once in a while into the public view, but it really does simmer under the surface here in Washington in these conservative legal circles, which have generally been pretty tight knit thanks to the Federalist Society. But now MAGA has significant frustrations with judges that were picked by the Federalist Society, ended up in the courts, and actually all the way up to the Supreme Court. And what this has MAGA, there was previously we could just say conservative judicial world. Now I think we have to make a distinction between conservative judicial circles and MAGA judicial circles, somewhere where you see someone like a Mike Davis in that. MAGA judicial circles is sort of, to paraphrase Trump, putting on a pause to figure out what the hell is going on because they don't have a deep bench. MAGA is a new movement. They don't have a deep bench of Mike Davises going back decades in the way Federal Society has a deep bench of Neil Gorsuch's and Amy Coney Barrett's going back decades. So they have a lot to do in terms of vetting and recruiting. So it's not entirely surprising that we didn't see the same fast machination happening in Trump 2.0.
Well, not only that, Phil, I mean, this raises the other story I wanted to sort of weave in here, which is the story of Ed Martin, who's the acting special prosecutor in D.C. And he's a MAGA guy, but coming into conflict with, Republicans as well. And so apparently the story is, so he's the acting, Trump has nominated him. Tom Tillis, who sits on the Judiciary Committee, has come out and said he's not going to vote for him. He said if it was any other district in the country, he would support him, but not in DC because of his support for the pardons that Trump issued to some of the J6 folks. And apparently, if this does not get done in the next couple of weeks, by May 20th, I think is the deadline, guess who gets to pick the replacement for Ed Martin?
Ooh,
any ideas? Anybody know? Judge Boasberg.
Oh. That's poetic. That's Shakespearean.
That would be crazy town. What's going on here? Why the resistance? And ultimately what's going to happen? Well, is this something you think Trump will back down on because the alternative is just unthinkable?
So he offered a bit of a tepid response in the Oval Office earlier today when he was asked about the nomination of Ed Martin. He noted that crime is down in Washington, D.C., said that Ed Martin is doing a great job, but the important part here is that he said that anyone who opposes him should feel very badly. So a bit of a understated threat there. But look, Ed Martin...
Strongly worded letter to follow.
Yeah, right. Strongly worded letter to follow. I don't think that Trump wants to have the possibility of Judge Boasberg picking his attorney there. But Ed Martin, he was a stop the steal guy. And, Tom Tillis and other Republicans, they can get over some of the memory holing of what happened on January 6th. But I think that with Ed Martin, he's an example of this administration's hubris. Maybe they're jumping the shark because he was a stop the steal guy. And so there's some truth to what Tillis is saying there, that if it had been anyone else, we wouldn't be having this discussion. But instead, because it's Ed Martin, they're going to have this fight. I don't think the rest of the country necessarily cares about this, but it is something that I think is going to tell us about the resolve of the Trump administration, because they're now caught in this game of chicken with Republicans on the Hill. And yeah, as you pointed out, there's a clear consequence if they dawdle.
Emily, I mean, this could be a disaster. I think certainly it certainly does pit, the sort of MAGA folks, like you were just mentioning, against, a lot of institutional power in DC, including that Republican establishment, which is still there. I mean, I'm weaker than it's been in a long time, but still there.
Yeah, and I like the phrase that Philip just used, hubris. Was this the Trump administration riding high on what they believed was a quote unquote mandate because they managed to win the popular vote, in addition to winning the electoral college pretty handily, although the popular vote was still very close and under 50% just by a hair, going for Ed Martin, who's been serving in an acting capacity, not with any shyness whatsoever over the last several months.
Right.
And, is this going to be like when they nominated Matt Gaetz in that same sort of time period? And Gaetz, though, became a pawn that got the administration to get votes for Hegseth by saying, we understand you couldn't vote for Matt Gaetz, but you sure as heck better vote for Pete Hegseth. Well, now they can't play that card because they don't have any other obvious nomination leverage, but I guess we don't know yet what they might use to coerce a Tom Tillis into voting for Ed Martin. What I can tell so far, just watching MAGA World's reaction to Tillis's comments, which means Martin may not actually get stuck in committee and not even make it out of committee.
Right.
They are doubling and tripling down, just like they did with Matt Gaetz, just like they did with Pete Hegseth when Joni Ernst flirted with potentially not voting for him. So it seems to me that they think they do have, whether it's the power of the MAGA grassroots or if it is some other cards that are being played behind the scenes, seems to me like they do think they have significant leverage. So we'll see if Tillis buckles like Ernst did, and that happened pretty quickly.
Yeah, and one thing about that, I think the comparison between Hegseth and Ed Martin is helpful here because Joni Ernst told us when she was in the barrel over Hegseth that she was feeling the grassroots pressure, that really moved her to not just sit down with Hegseth, but to reconsider the pause that she had placed on him. The question now is, what groundswell of MAGA grassroots are really going to go to the mattresses for the attorney of Washington, D.C.? I mean, I think that this is just so far out of the scope of even some of the the more involved MAGA diehards, who aren't in this every single day politically.
All right, we've been down in the legal weeds. Let's pull back from it. I cannot let go until we talk about a couple of other Trump-related stories, and we've got just a couple of minutes. Emily, the Prime Minister of Canada, the new Prime Minister of Canada, was at the White House yesterday and had a meeting with Trump and said basically, there are some places that are not for sale. Canada is not for sale. Canada will never be for sale. And Trump said, in classic Trump, never say never. I mean, he can't let it go.
No, and he had a funny moment when Mark Carney was making that point. Mark Carney very cleverly invoked the White House. He said, some places, we're sitting in one right now, Buckingham Palace, and are not for sale. And Trump jumped in and said, so true. Very true. So true. And he kind of was playing both sides of that. So it was, classic Trump, but also I think finally other world leaders reckoning with classic Trump. Sort of it was essential Trump on display. And now some of them understand that and know how to work with that and know if they approach him in what he perceives as good faith, so long as their voters don't perceive it as overly kissing the ring, which is what happened to Trudeau. It's such a fine line that they have to walk. They have to be perceived as defending their sovereignty with their voters, but perceived as operating in good faith with Donald Trump. We've seen Claudia Sheinbaum, up until at least recently, do this very well. I think we're starting to see other world leaders understand how to deal with Trump. It only took 10 years.
Phil, that story is worth a good chuckle. But there was a story in the Wall Street Journal today that is a little bit more serious, and it was exclusive. And the headline was, U.S. orders intelligence agencies to step up spying on Greenland. And here's what it said. According to two people familiar with the effort, several high-ranking officials under DNI Tulsi Gabbard issued a, quote, collection emphasis message to intelligence agency heads last week. They were directed to learn more about Greenland's independence movement and attitudes on American resource extraction on the island. What do you make of this report? I mean, again, Trump's had these, and they came out really quickly. That it was the Panama Canal, and it was Greenland, and it was Canada, and here we are, 100 plus days into his administration, and we're still talking about these three things. Canada maybe less seriously now, but Greenland seems to still be an object of Trump's desire.
And with Panama, the administration got what they wanted. Panama said, we're not going to rejoin the Belt and Road. BlackRock was able to sign a lease for both sides of the canal there. I do think that there's something to some of these machinations from Trump, not just about trying to carve out a sphere of influence, which I think he clearly is doing, but as he looks to his legacy, what's one way to solidify yourself in the history books? It's gain new ground. Canada, that was always a stretch. I think that Trump is clearly trolling. Panama, also very similar. But Greenland, hope springs eternal. In terms of this story specifically, I don't think that the national security apparatus is going to be stretched too far thin to spy on folks in Greenland. First of all, we do this all the time. I mean, the Obama administration was snooping on German Chancellor Merkel, but with Greenland, their population is, I think, around 60,000. That's about the same as Janesville, Wisconsin. So it's not like it's going to require a lot more manpower to figure out what they're saying there in Greenland. But yeah, again,
why do you know the population of Janesville, Wisconsin?
I looked it up. But still, there is something significant to this. I mean, like the sea lanes are becoming clearer there. China and Russia went into the game as a result of some of the warming in the region. The United States, they want Greenland, and the question is, do they want an expanded presence there, or do we actually want to take over the place?
Emily, what do you think? I have to think if this is part of Trump's legacy and somehow Greenland becomes part of the United States in some form or fashion, Trump will immediately change the name to Trumpland. That's a given.
Well, there were those memes in the first administration when he tossed the idea out initially in a very rough way of him building the casino in Greenland. It was like early AI or some type of Photoshop that Trump actually ended up posting himself. So who knows what business opportunities await in Greenland. But I mean, I do think with this, he is completely serious. I think we have every indication that, as silly as this idea sounds, he's completely serious. I think that's augmented by the fact that some Republican senators who are hawkish want him to be serious. So that gives it an extra sort of dose of jet fuel as he pursues it. So again, this could be a strategic leak, could be something they're just putting out there. But the cost benefit analysis of that doesn't make a ton of sense to me either. You sort of end up unnecessarily pissing off Greenland. But who knows, because I'm not sure that all of these leaks are strategic.
Yeah.
Yes, in Denmark.
All right. Okay, we're going to take another quick break, and we'll be right back with more Real Clear Politics on SiriusXM. Stick around. Welcome back to Real Clear Politics on SiriusXM. I'm Tom Bevan, co-founder and president of RCP. Speaking today with Phil Wegmann. He's our White House reporter for Real Clear Politics, and Emily Jashinsky. She's the Washington correspondent for UnHerd. Emily, let me start this segment by coming to you. There were two stories over the past week and we carried pieces on these subjects on Real Clear Politics this morning. One was about the Met Gala by Sasha Stone at Substack. She wrote a Substack piece about this. And the other one was by Andrew Stiles of the Washington Free Beacon about the Pulitzer Prize winning. And the implication of both is that these are the sort of elites that are now simply talking to themselves. They're irrelevant. Like, who really cares about the Met Gala at all? And who really cares who win Pulitzer Prizes anymore? I mean, over the last few years, the way the media has sort of disgraced themselves, that they're now, sort of yucking it up and patting each other on the back. But I mean, do you feel that same way? Do you watch the Met Gala? I know you cover culture. Do you watch this anymore? Is it still interesting? Is it still relevant in any way? Or is it just has it become just totally irrelevant?
Well, I try hard never to do fashion criticism. I lean very heavily on one of my friends who actually is a very regular listener of the show. So shout out to Jamie for any sort of criticism of this. And what was interesting, genuinely, and it's a connection to the Pulitzers too. I saw Barry Weiss post that the Pulitzers had been awarded and she hadn't even heard anything about it. And I think she was arguing that speaks to their increasing irrelevance. And you know what? I actually felt the Met Gala news cycle was a little quieter this year, muted. And maybe the reason for that is we are more and more in our bubbles. Maybe it's just that my bubble isn't talking about the Met Gala as much as it used to, because I used to be in more of a monoculture. We all used to be in more of a monocultural culture. And now we're kind of splintered into these niches where big cultural events that used to matter more to everyone are now mattering the same level to a much smaller slice of the population.
Yeah, I mean, I can see that as being true, but at the same time, it's like the Super Bowl is still the Super Bowl. And,
True.
I remember the Met Gala. I mean, I used to
go.
Never been. And I don't really care that much about it. But when it happened, like I couldn't get away from it is the point. And now it kind of like, I caught a little bit of it, but for the most part, it kind of came and went. And it certainly did not make the same sort of splash. Wegmann, what do you think? I mean, do you obsess over who wears what at the Met Gala? I mean, is that right in your wheelhouse or what?
I mean, Kamala Harris did go, and the Democrats posted it on X, which is quite interesting.
I did see that. That's one of the things that I did see.
Yeah, that's really going to win over voters in Iowa and, South Carolina and
for
New Hampshire.
Her comeback.
Yeah. I think there's better fashion on display at the NFL draft, but talking about the Pulitzers, when you look at these institutions and these awards that are supposed to be the gold standard, that implies that the work that is presented there is beyond reproach. And when we're talking about the Pulitzers, I think that this year in particular, I missed that the awards happened. But when I was scrolling through who actually won, I noticed that ProPublica got an award for their coverage of some of these abortion bans in the States, and their coverage alleged that it was these abortion bans that had led to the loss of life of some of these mothers. And obviously, any loss of life is tragic, but it seems that these deaths were the result of medical malpractice, not the actual bans. And the reason why I think you can say that is if you look at each of these bans in these states, if you look at, Georgia's pro-life law, for instance, right there, in plain English, there are exceptions laid out for the life of the mother. ProPublica sort of glossed over that and, blamed the bans themselves. Clearly, these mothers who lost their lives, they should have received emergency abortions after they took the abortion pill. And the doctors who failed to perform these life-saving procedures, maybe they were misinformed about the law because they got their news from outlets like ProPublica. So the fact that there's even debate or an argument over that coverage, and yet they have gotten an award that is supposed to be reserved for the gold standard of journalism, I think that shows how partisanship and how ideology really has slipped in here. And, these institutions, they're sowing their own destruction.
Emily, I mean, the piece that we ran today from Andrew Stiles was titled "What Vibe Shift?" As if like, some of the culture has shifted back in a more conservative direction, anti-woke, anti-DEI, all of that, but not the Pulitzers, right? And his point is, I mean, the picture that won the Pulitzer Prize for best photo was not the photo that everyone in America saw and has become the most iconic image, not just from the 2024 campaign. Trump, obviously, fist raised, blood running down his face, chanting "fight, fight, fight." Wasn't that photo? And to Phil's point, some of these other awards were very much, I think, representative of an ideology that put more emphasis on sort of, left-leaning narratives and woke politics.
Definitely. And I don't think that's going to change with the Pulitzers. And I think this speaks to one of the biggest outstanding questions of the last several months, which was, did Trump initiate a vibe shift that is durable, or is it a fleeting moment of several months? And then the hardened core of what many people refer to as the professional managerial class that now inhabits the C-suites and the positions of cultural dominance in newsrooms and boardrooms, do they retain what a lot of people also came to call wokeness? And they're just kind of laying low for now. And if they sense that, Trump gets less popular, Republicans get less popular, Elon gets less popular, is there another moment where they kind of re-seize the cultural vibes, I guess, to continue using that phrase? I actually think that's an open question. And I think what we're seeing from the Pulitzer suggests that the elites aren't really fundamentally shifting so much as they may be, they're still rooted in the same ideology, but there's a breeze that blew them gently right for a couple of months.
Well, I will take the last word here because we got to run. But to me, Susan, our very own Susan Crabtree, won the Dow Prize this year. It was the inaugural prize. We at RealClearPolitics and the RealClear Foundation have been awarding the Samizdat Prize for the last 2 years for people who spoke out in the face of censorship. And those prizes to me seem to be more relevant every single year. And the Pulitzers seem to be getting less and less relevant. So for what it's worth,
yeah,
that's my little pitch. All right. That's going to do it for us for this segment. I'm Tom Bevan, co-founder and president of RealClearPolitics. I've been speaking with Emily Jashinsky. She's the Washington correspondent for UnHerd. And Phil Wegmann, he's our White House correspondent. Stick around. When we come back, I'm going to talk to Sean Trende about the Georgia Senate race and whether Republicans still have a shot there after Brian Kemp said he is no longer in the running. We'll be right back after this. Welcome back to RealClearPolitics on SiriusXM. I'm Tom Bevan, co-founder and president of RCP. Joined now by Sean Trende. He's our senior elections analyst. Mr. Trende, how you doing?
I'm doing great. How are you?
It's always good to have you on the show, Sean.
Great to be here. That's Dr. Trende. Come on, get with it.
Oh, yes. Sorry. Congratulations. Like Dr. Jill.
That's right. Exactly. So I had the actual PhD. She had an EdD. Come on. No, I'm just kidding. PhD should never demand to be called doctor.
Well, you're a doctor in my book. So, Sean, let's talk. There's never really any shortage of politics news to talk about. And we talked about this the other day, but I want to get your thoughts on this. So Brian Kemp announced that he is not going to run for Senate. He is obviously the current governor of Georgia, 2-term, very popular, and was seen, I think, by most Republicans as, even probably the ones who don't like him very much, as their best chance at beating Jon Ossoff in that Senate race. And certainly the public polling data that we've seen all reflected that. But he's not going to run. How big of a blow is this to Republicans' chances to taking that seat?
If you assume Kemp would have made it through the primary, which I don't think was a given, I think it's a huge blow. I think he would have, I don't know if he would have wiped the table with Ossoff, but he was kind of one of the last gasps of the old Republican coalition in Georgia, where he did very well with rural whites, but also could hold his own among suburban whites. Some of the other Republicans who have been named, not necessarily so much. So we'll have to wait and see what comes of it.
Did he do this, Sean? He didn't really give a reason other than he just said it wasn't the right time for him and his family. But did he do this because he wants to run potentially for president in 2028?
I mean, that's a possibility. I think the positive big picture spin for Republicans would be if he wants to run for president in 2028, although I don't know that there's really much Kemp mania at the federal level. I think where it could be really bad for Georgia is kind of the negative thing. He didn't run because he didn't want to get just air bombed by Trump or Trump supporters for the next few years, and then go for the next few months, and then go to DC and have to constantly vote for a lot of stuff he doesn't really like. So if that's the case, then you're talking about probably similar thoughts and processes going on with people like Raffensperger and King, and that's how you end up with Marjorie Taylor Greene as your nominee in Georgia.
Well, let's talk about that, because that leaves, and again, the Atlanta Journal-Constitution just came out with a poll like less than a week ago, and obviously had Kemp ahead of Ossoff. But the other Republicans' potential general election matchups that they polled were against Brad Raffensperger. That Ossoff beats him by 9 points. Beats King, who's I believe the state insurance head of the state insurance agency there, by 13 points, and Marjorie Taylor Greene 54-37. Ossoff beats her in this poll by 17 points. So even the sort of second best option as far as the data is concerned is Raffensperger, and he's still almost down 10 points.
Yeah. Kemp had his own brand in Georgia. Now, with Raffensperger, it's an interesting question. How much of that is Trump people disliking him who will eventually come around? But yeah, it's clear that Ossoff, is in a much better position against someone who doesn't have Kemp's stature and Kemp's kind of long-time record of vote getting in the state. But it's also clear that someone like, Marjorie Taylor Greene is not only going to have to like build her own brand up, she's going to have to convince Ossoff supporters to come over to her side. If she gets the nomination, I mean, we've seen this movie over and over again in Republican Senate races. If she gets the nominee, we know how it ends, and it's probably not a great story for the Republicans.
But I find it hard to believe that Ossoff is that strong. I mean, is this just a case of the fact that he's the known quantity? They haven't really run any ads against him. I mean, he doesn't seem like, given where that state went just, a few months ago, that he would be in that strong of a position.
Yeah, so against Marjorie Taylor Greene, I think it's safe to say that this is a negative vote. But the other thing to take into account is when you're talking about his standing against someone like Raffensperger, who is generally not radioactive, he's below 50%. Right. And so the difference between the Raffensperger pairing and the Kemp pairing is probably a lot of people just don't even know who Brad Raffensperger is. Once he gets his campaign underway, runs some ads against Ossoff, who is, kind of like generic Democrat right now, I think that race would be very tight. But this is also not a great environment for Republicans in general in Georgia. So it may just, or nationally, with Trump's approval rating sitting at like 45%. So it may just be the case that, Georgia is one of those states that if you don't have a star like Kemp in this environment, it's going to be an uphill battle to unseat an incumbent there.
Do you see, Sean, do you see that sort of playing out across the political landscape, staying in the Senate for now? I mean, how do you think Republicans, Sununu's not running in New Hampshire, so that was another blow, I think, for Republicans. How do you think the recruiting is going right now at the Senate level, but also to the extent there's any news in these House races as well?
Well, they did recruit a strong primary challenge to John Cornyn in one of those races that's kind of on the border of maybe being competitive with the right or wrong Republican nominee. But overall, it's kind of been a disappointing cycle for Republicans. They seem to have gotten Susan Collins to stick around, so that's a good sign for them. But, you had these two races with Georgia and New Hampshire that were kind of looking like races maybe the GOP could pick up seats with the right candidate, and two GOP superstars in the states just bowed out. Michigan, it looks like Mike Rogers may be going for a second bite at the apple, but if he couldn't win in 2024 with Trump carrying the state, I'm not sure how he does it with, Trump at 45% job approval. So tough.
I see Tom Tillis is back in the news a little bit on the support for Ed Martin. He's part of the Senate Judiciary Committee, and he's getting lit up by folks on the right over this. What's his situation? He's up, and that's a state that I think I would be surprised if he does not pick up a challenge there in the primary.
Yeah, I think that's probably right. And it's a state where, Republicans have had considerable success. They lost the Senate race in 2008, but have done well since then. But if he loses to a challenge from the hard right, I mean, North Carolina is not a hard right state anymore. And it's going to be really, really tough for the GOP to hold that seat. It'll be tough if former Governor Cooper gets in to begin with. But if they knock out, a two-term incumbent and replace him with a firebrand, that seat is gone.
What about the House, Sean? What are you seeing in the House? Obviously, they're trying to get the big, beautiful bill done. And we've seen you get the budget hawks and the folks who are, don't want any cuts to Medicaid. They're in tough districts around the country. I mean, it's really, you can see the divisions and the tensions in the Republican caucus here. How's this going to play out? And where do you think the Republicans stand? I mean, obviously, very, very slim margin, right?
Yeah, I think you have to look back over history, and there have been 3 instances where the president's party has picked up seats in a midterm election. And whatever else you want to say about Trump, he isn't as popular as FDR was in 1934 or George W. Bush in 2002 or even Clinton in 98. I think you start from a position of expecting the GOP to lose the House. Now, there aren't a lot of competitive seats out there on either side, so maybe not. But yeah, you're right about this fight over the bill, that there's a lot of divisions in the caucus. They can only lose a handful of votes and still get the bill through. So it's going to be a really, really tough slog to get it through.
Are there last question, Sean? We got about a minute left, and looking at sort of I think last cycle we only had like a couple gubernatorial races that were out there that were even competitive. New Hampshire and North Carolina, I think, were the two. Beyond that, there just weren't a lot of races in general. This year they come in waves. This year we've got everybody, all the big kahunas are up, right? Like Illinois, New York, California. It's like I think there are, I don't know, 30 something races. Any surprises out there on the landscape that you've picked up on in terms of these governor's races of all these, mostly the biggest states that are out there?
Not really so far. I mean, I think, again, in an environment that's not great for Republicans, it's hard to see how they pick up, say, the governorship of California. I think there's going to be, a lot of action. Maybe there's a primary challenge to Hochul, and she is a very unpopular governor. So you could see maybe things falling apart for her there. We'll have a better idea after the 2025 races, though, in New Jersey and Virginia, which are going to give us kind of our first peeks at the new battlefield that the Republicans are going to be fighting on.
Do we historically do we read too much into those races, or do they actually tell us something about what's coming down the road?
So in 2021, New Jersey was a 4-point race and Republicans narrowly won Virginia, and people thought that was an aberration, but actually that kind of foreshadowed Trump coming close to New Jersey in 2024 and Virginia tightening from where it was in 2020. So I think it can give us a pretty good read. If the Virginia race is a 10-point blowout, it is not a good sign for Republicans.
All right. We will leave it there. Sean Trende, Senior Elections Analyst for RealClearPolitics. Sean, always good to talk to you. Thanks.
Thank you.
All right. And that's going to do it for us. On behalf of Emily and Phil, I'm Tom Bevan, co-founder and president of RCP. You've been listening to Real Clear Politics on SiriusXM. Everybody have a great night. We'll see you back here tomorrow.